Welcome once again to Cinemaholics.
Wait, what?
I'm John Negroni, box office columnist for Atom Tickets, staff writer for the Young Folks, and head writer of Cinemaholics.com. You okay, Will?
Yeah, I think so.
Right. Okay, well, you already heard his voice, folks. He's a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend, and, Will, are you sweating?
Yeah, I guess I just,
Are you alright, Will?
Yeah, I guess I'm just a little confused.
Confused about what?
Well, you know, they usually start the show with, I don't know, some sort of escapade.
What are you talking about, Will? This is Cinemaholics, not season 2 of Community. We have some serious, hard-hitting reviews to get to.
Okay, I'm sorry. I guess everything's just been so out of whack with me these last few months. Like the grocery store ran out of my favorite can opener. Ariana Grande recently boycotted my Instagram stories. Nearly 170,000 Americans have died preventable deaths in just the last 5 months from a pandemic. I guess I've just gotten used to something random or weird happening during the show, like a song and dance musical number with the one and only Ivan, or a crossover with the Harlem Globetrotters, maybe a superhero fantasy scene where you sort out your father dependency thing, or a game show bit, or a Chef Chat remake of Charles in Charge theme song, or a suspenseful standoff with the Russian mafia. You know, normal stuff for us.
Well, I don't know. Well, for some reason I want to say that you're scaring me again, but honestly, I just hope you feel better soon, because we have some, business to take care of.
Well, thanks. I guess that sounds good. I just can't wait to...
It's time for a PSA, podcast service announcement. Well, hello there, Mr. Millennial. I see you're now delivering groceries for seniors like me who don't want to make a trip to the grocery store these days.
I knew it. Okay, what do I have to say now to get this over with?
What? What do you...
Sorry. Grandma Charades, what in the modern technology reference are you doing here? Drifts in a goofy way I have to spell out with the comedic timing of a spoken word because, well, this is a podcast.
Well, Mr. Millennial, I'm here to make fun of your generation with no self-awareness of how royally my generation screws up without taking any collective responsibility. Now, have you called your parents lately and acted nicer than you feel right now about their Facebook activity?
No, Grandma Charades, I've been too busy trying to figure out how I'm supposed to stop a global threat of climate change while simultaneously making enough money to pay for your Social Security, even though mine is no guarantee however many years from now. But I promise I'll get to it.
Glad to hear it. I hope you now know that when it comes to your elders, we always know what's worst for you is best for us.
Hey, wait a minute, Grandma Charades. Your Walmart grocery app order contains a recalled jar of Peter Pan peanut butter, a wrench, half a Big Mac sandwich, non-flushable wipes, military-grade hairspray, non-biodegradable Tupperware, a bunch of movies that are clearly mockbusters of famous Pixar and Disney cartoons, and all 15 seasons of Grey's Anatomy.
Oh, well, I've been meaning to catch up.
Grandma Charades, I'll fulfill this order, but I at least expect a tip, especially if you expect me to find only the second disc of the Golden Girls Season 3 DVD.
Fine, here's a tip. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to Cinemaholics on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and wherever else you love podcasts. Welcome once again to Cinemaholics. I'm John Negroni. I am the box office columnist for Atom Tickets, head writer of Cinemaholics.com, staff writer for the Young Folks. He is a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend, and he also reviews films for Cinemaholics.com. It's Will Ashton.
Hey, feeling a little deja vu, but how you doing?
Deja vu? Why?
I don't know. Just one of those days, I guess.
Well, you can find more episodes of Cinemaholics to fill all those days, including our full archive on Cinemaholics.com. And you can write into the show anytime by sending us an email, cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com. We have a new feature, by the way. Have you heard of the Swell app, Will Ashton?
No, but it sounds swell, I guess.
It's sweller than you may even predict. So this is a new app that lets you leave voicemails. And we just signed up for this. And so if you're a listener and you want to hear your own voice on the show, we're setting this up. I'll try to link to it in the show notes, but all you need to do is find Cinemaholics on the Swell app and leave us a voicemail on one of our prompts. And we'll probably be doing like questions on there, hoping some people can use it for their own birthday shout outs, that kind of fun thing. So definitely check that out if you are interested. And last, don't forget, if you want to become a monthly supporter of Cinemaholics, become one of our monthly patrons, we invite you to check out patreon.com/Cinemaholics to learn more details. That's another link that is, of course, as always, in the show notes. All right, just a few off topics to get to because we have a lot of interesting films we are going to be reviewing this week. This week, we're going to be looking at Project Power, the new Netflix action superhero film. We have the documentary Boy State, which just hit Apple TV+, Magic Camp, which just hit Disney+, and one last documentary, Happy Happy Joy Joy, about the Ren and Stimpy shows. So interesting range of films to get to. But first, our off topics. We are going to be releasing our next extra milestone later this week, but you can check out the latest one right now, in which Sam Nolan and myself talked about La Dolce Vita, which just celebrated 60 years since its release. This is one of my all-time favorite movies. Of course, Federico Fellini's masterpiece. Definitely want to check that episode out. Even if you've never seen La Dolce Vita, I try to make my case for why you might want to check it out or rewatch it if it didn't work for you the first time. So that's out right now. Our Q&A episode is still in process of coming out. Trying to find a good day to release this one, but we did record our Q&A episode. We answered a ton of your questions, a lot of interesting topics, like how we watch movies at home, what kind of movies would we make if we were filmmakers, all kinds of fun stuff like that. I asked Will a few personal questions. So that was good. I feel like you answered pretty honestly, I think so. And yeah, that'll be out later this week. Last, we have a couple of films we're not getting to this week, but they are still on our radar. First, there's Sputnik, which we might have a written review for that coming out later this week. That is the Russian alien invasion horror movie that just didn't find time to see it, but I'm hearing good things.
Yeah.
I don't know if you are, Will.
No, I've been hearing good things as well. I didn't hear about it until you mentioned it last week as a potential film to talk about this week, but yeah, it sounds like it's getting some good notices, which is good to hear.
Yeah, similarly, I really want to check out La Llorona, which is a new Shudder film. I think it's a Shudder exclusive.
Oh, it's a Shudder film?
Yeah. So you can find that right now, and I've heard that is also really good, a lot better than Curse of La Llorona, which is the other film, the one that was the Conjuring universe version of that story, of that character. I guess that's more of like a horror monster, but yeah, that's out as well. And I've heard that La Llorona is a lot better. It's a lot more edgy, and it's got more of that horror tint to it that you would expect from the folklore. So I'm excited to check that one out. And last, for some reason, I was convinced that Will was going to watch Spree. We tried to investigate this earlier in the show. Will checked the receipts, and I was so confident, Will, that you had seen Spree and you were going to talk about it this week that I actually put it in our outline and I had to delete it, because you corrected the record and said, nope, never said you were going to watch Spree, but this is the new rideshare killer thriller, I suppose, starring Joe Keery from the Stranger Things movies. So that's also getting some notice. I've heard mixed things, but a few good things here, nothing too negative. And it's kind of film that I would want to see in a drive-in, considering it's in a car.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't against seeing it. I just hadn't seen it. So I don't know if is it VOD or is it on a streaming service?
I believe it's VOD right now. If it's on a streaming service, I'm not aware of it, but you could probably check it out via virtual cinemas as well. As always, we ask that you at least see what's available in virtual cinemas first, because you tend to be able to, it's like the same thing as renting. You might pay a little bit more, but you'll be supporting art house theaters and helping them stay afloat. If that is something that's within your means, we ask that you give it a shot. Consider doing that. We're trying to do that as well. And then last, Will, I checked out Yes, God, Yes. And this was the film that Abby Olcese talked to us about a few weeks ago. This is the new film that is about a young woman in the early 2000s who goes to a Catholic school who has a bit of a sexual discovery. And I have to say, so Abby gave this film high praise. She gave it an A on this program. And I am similarly singing its praises. She was preaching to the choir indeed when she was praising this film, because I loved Yes, God, Yes. Such a fun, humble movie. It's not flashy. It's not too big. It doesn't go too far with its premise. I think the central character, she plays Nancy in the Stranger Things films, and unfortunately her name is escaping me, but we've seen her in other things as well. Talia Dyer, I think, is her name. And she is such a treasure in this movie, really is making the case that she could be an even bigger star with some projects like this that are in this vein, that really showing off just how talented a young performer she is. I think the Stranger Things show hasn't quite known what to do with her throughout the 3 seasons. And I think in this movie, some of her untapped potential is coming through. This is a funny movie. It's dark, but not too dark. It's not too mean-spirited, but it is sort of cynical about the way we allow religion to dominate our lives and our morality. And so I definitely recommend Yes, God, Yes, along with Abby Olchesky. I think I ended up pretty close to an A- on it, but I think overall I'm about a B+. It's not a big movie. It's not the kind of movie that I think is so essential that it's just going to knock everyone off their feet. It's very specific, but yes, a very hearty, enthusiastic B+ from me. Easy recommend for anybody who grew up in sort of an evangelical or Catholic background. They can definitely see themselves in the situation and some of the absurdities and the humor in that. And even if you didn't grow up in that, I think there is a lot to glean from that experience and what people, other people might have gone through as middle schoolers and high schoolers and so on. So definitely recommend Yes, God, Yes. I don't know if you'll get to it, Will, but if you do, I'd be curious to hear what you think.
Yeah, I mean, it's on my list. It just came to one of the virtual cinemas I frequent, so I might check it out soon. But yeah, I've heard good things from you and Abby, obviously, and from other critics, so I'll have to check it out.
All right, let's get into our first review of the week. We're talking about Project Power.
Power, power, speak a little louder.
If there was a pill
Hungry for that money, I'm coming to devour.
that could give you 5 minutes
Spit it so they get it. I'm embedded with the power.
of pure power,
I'm embedded with the power.
would you take it?
You don't know who I am and what I'm about, but I'll do anything to find that source.
Listen to my voice. Am I lying?
Welcome to Project Power. Our goal is simple: the next evolution of the human species.
You ever taken one of those before? It can make you strong, make you invisible. You never know what your power is until you try it.
You push that power, don't you?
Yeah. On the streets, they're talking about superpowers, but they're not talking about how one hit could kill you.
Project Power is basically a superhero action film. And I didn't know this going into it. And I didn't even realize it during the movie, but apparently it's rated R, which I guess makes sense because there's some stuff that happens. It's very
People
gross,
explode.
very over the top. Yeah, people explode. There's gory stuff. But I guess the reason I thought it was kind of going for PG-13 is because they sort of avoid F-bombs and they sort of, there's some PG-13 tropes in here, which I thought was
get you,
strange.
man. Because there's one scene where like Jamie Foxx it's about to say the F word and he doesn't.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this might be PG-13. It's like, wait a minute, a guy just exploded like 5 minutes ago. There's no way this is PG or trying to be PG-13.
That's probably confusing because we haven't explained the premise of the film yet. So this just hit Netflix, and the original script was a bit of a bidding war. A lot of studios wanted to make this, and the reason is because the premise is pretty promising. The idea is that a pharmaceutical sort of corporation has created a drug or a pill that gives you superpowers for 5 minutes. The catch is that you don't know what your power is. So every person has a different power. And there is a chance that if you take this pill, you will explode, as we have laid out here. And the movie itself follows a drug dealer played by kind of a newcomer actor who I'm not as aware of, Dominique Fishback. I think we've seen her maybe one or two other things. And then she is kind of a drug dealer who is working in tandem with a police detective played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And their worlds collide with a former soldier, the Major, played by Jamie Foxx, who is hunting down the people who distribute this pill because of something related to a bit of a complicated backstory, but definitely not a backstory that I thought was all that interesting. It was weird because you get to this point in the film where you're finding out this is why all of these characters are here. They're united by these cool powers. And really what it comes down to is the thing that our central character wants is very rote. It's very tropey. There's nothing much to it. I think that some of the subplots in here are a little interesting. I think the idea of Joseph Gordon-Levitt as this cop who has to sort of secretly use the pill in order to compete with criminals who are using this pill, but he has to do it secretly. There's an interesting vein of a story there. I think Dominique Fishback, it's a lot of good scenes, and she doesn't end up being kind of just like the annoying side character who is there because reasons. She actually has a little bit of agency in this and kind of gives something to the plot without being a distraction more than anything. But I don't know, this film did not really register for me, Will. As an action movie, it has its moments. This comes to us from the directors of Paranormal Activity 3 and Nerve. I saw a lot of Nerve in this, and I saw some horror elements, certainly out of Paranormal Activity 3. There's one scene in particular that did wow me. Like, genuinely, I thought was a standout scene that, you know, in a better movie would have made the movie. But other than that, Project Power was a huge letdown for me. It didn't have a lot of power for me, but what did you think of the movie, Will?
I'm a little more mixed on it, I guess. Like, I do recognize some of the good that's in here. Like, like you were saying, I think the premise itself is intriguing enough that I was kind of willing to forgive some of the like tropey things you're saying and some of the like clunky writing, which is very apparent throughout the film, but not enough to where like I can really cut some slack. Because like you said, it does follow such a rote formula as far as these things are concerned. Like, the R-rated elements does give it a little bit more spice, but the story itself doesn't really go in any direction that you wouldn't expect it to, which is a shame, because I do think if this story or the script was taken from this writer, I'm not as familiar with who they are, but if maybe like another writer just like kind of fleshed it out and kind of really dug more into like the metaphor here, or like maybe the allegory, or like something that like made it a little bit more meaningful as it stands, like the intent of the film seems kind of like messy at times. Like, I think I get what it's trying to do, but I don't really think the execution really makes it clear enough to where like it really affects it, or really makes it effective. I mean, but as a film, like, I mean, visually it's more striking than a lot of the recent Netflix blockbusters. Like, I think this is a little bit more visually appealing than something like The Old Guard or Bright. In some respects, some of the scenes look kind of like overwashed out and kind of ugly, but some of them are very like, you know, kinetic and fun. So I was kind of back and forth in the visual style. But I mean, the performances, I do really like Dominique Fishback. I saw her in The Night Comes to Us, I think it's called, or so. It was like an indie film from about 3 or 4 years ago, I think. And she was the lead in it. She was really good in it. And I'm glad that she got this platform. I think she does a really good job here. I think Jamie Foxx is a lot of fun. Joseph Gordon-Levitt's fine. He seems a little miscast, but I get he's trying to do kind of like the Robin thing again. So it's
a little
not,
bit. Yeah,
it's not bad. Just I'm like, I don't know. I feel like I never really fully bought him in this character. Maybe it's that baby face. I don't know what it is. But as a film, yeah, I agree with a lot of your criticisms. I think I'm a little bit more forgiving of the film because I do like Henry Jose and Ariel Schulman. I think with the exception of Paranormal Activity 4, I've really enjoyed a lot of their stuff. And I do think they have a fun visual style, and I think they have a playfulness to their filmmaking that's generally enjoyable, especially for something like this. But there is something about this film in particular that's really kind of like overly serious and overly moody in a way that like kind of prevents it from having as much fun as the premise suggests. Because like the idea of like, you know, like these characters can have these powers that, you know, can change at a whim and could be very deadly and stuff like it. It could be a lot more cartoony, a lot more like silly than I think it could be. And so like the kind of more serious approach kind of like makes it seem silly in a bad way, I feel like, because it's kind of going for something that's a little bit more grounded in its approach. So I don't know. I'm back and forth on it. There's stuff in here I like, and there's a lot of stuff I don't. So I don't know. I'll figure it out where I stand as we talk.
Yeah, I think even with that serious tone, I think for me, it's more noticeable that they do have this really intriguing premise, and they have all of these amazing directions they can go into with these powers and everything. But ultimately, we don't see a lot of different powers, and most of them are just not very interesting. There's one, for example, where one of the characters kind of turns into a bad CGI troll from like the Harry Potter movies, and it's really out of place, I thought. And the whole culmination of that scene is super underwhelming. Yeah, it's an $85 million budget. So we're definitely not looking at a film with like the massive Disney budget you would get for a big superhero film.
But it has a like TV pilot feel to it a lot. Maybe it's because of Netflix thing, but I got that sense a lot watching this. Agreed.
Speaking of TV, you mentioned Dominique Fishback. I think film-wise, I've seen her in like The Hate U Give is probably the only other thing I've seen her in movie-wise. But she's been in a bunch of shows. I mean, she's had like smaller roles and certain episodes. The only show I think she's been like a serious regular was The Deuce on HBO. But yeah, other than that, she is a relative newcomer when it comes to film. And then also Mattson Tomlin, who did the screenplay you kind of briefly mentioned. I didn't know this screenwriter very well because he's actually working on the new Batman movie with Matt Reeves. So I'm very curious about how this is going to kind of like, inform, like if this film is successful or if it's not successful, if that is going to inform how people receive the Batman, or if people are going to forget this movie and be like, oh, the screenwriter of Project Power. Okay. Or if they're going to be like, oh, no wonder, if the film ends up not being good, being like, well, Project Power wasn't good, if that's their opinion. Right. So, but yeah, this is more of an up and coming screenwriter. He's only been around for a few years now. That said, I agree with you a lot of your criticisms. I want to say one nice thing, specifically the body horror stuff, is at least sort of doing something different with the superhero thing. I like the idea of like the superhero body horror, and really
I always love body horror.
Like it's a good idea to infuse that, and like these superpowers are extremely dangerous, and it plays into the metaphor pretty well. There are some scenes here that I was like, oh my goodness, of course this is rated R, even though like the rest of the movie didn't quite match that. There's a particular action scene where we are literally watching somebody's body break down in kind of a one shot, where a fight is being observed beyond the glass. And even though the point of this scene, or like the horrendous violence of this scene, is never paid off in any meaningful way. Like there's never a moment where you can think back to that scene and be like, this scene had to happen because it informs this character motivation or decision that happens later. No, it's just kind of like a flashy scene that happens that is very well produced, that you get the sense that it's Netflix trying to insert maybe their own Daredevil hallway fight scene to sort of get attention. And it comes across that way. It doesn't mean the scene is any less exciting. And I think that it is easily the best one of the movie. And I was surprised that none of the rest of the movies seemed to match up in terms of quality for me.
It's kind of the same issues that Chris Hemsworth Netflix action movie from like a few months ago that I can't even remember the title. Yeah, there you go. Which I think this movie's better than that, but that had a similar issue. I just remembered it's Night Comes On is the Dominique Fishback movie I was referring to. Also, did you know she's 29? I had no idea.
No, that is a huge surprise to me. I thought she was maybe in her early 20s. Wow.
Yeah, no, I didn't even think she was even in her 20s. So, surprised to me. I mean,
she plays a high schooler in this movie.
Right. Yeah, I mean, she's older than me. I'm just more surprised. I'm not trying to put her in a spot or anything. I think she's a great actress.
She's my age, so.
Yeah. Wow. Anyway, I mean, unless Google's wrong on that. But, in any case, yeah, I don't think this is a bad film. I think it's fine. I just think it's not really going to sit with me too long. Like, I think it's another one of these Netflix action movies that it's, I think, a little bit better than some of the ones we've gotten recently, but ultimately I just feel it to be kind of middling in its approach. I mean, like I said before, I do like Jamie Foxx. I think he is a like legit star, and I think he has a lot of charisma, and I think he does bring a little bit more to this role than what's written on the page. And I enjoyed his performance in this. I thought he did a good job, and I think he works well with Dominique Fishback. But yeah, in the end, I just was kind of left wanting, I guess, a little bit more than what I got. But at the same time, like, I don't think it's a particularly terrible film either. So I'm
it's mostly competent, even though it doesn't really amount to much, at least by my estimation. I'd say that I definitely agree. This is slightly better than a lot of other Netflix action movies we've gotten, even though it doesn't have the best action. it at least is a bit more of a solid script. It's not as
a little bit more
nonsensical.
inventive. Yeah.
I think what it's missing is just some more surprises. I think more of the surprises we get are all sort of built into the backstory of the major character, which are all sort of revealed in the midpoint. There was at no point in this movie where I was like, that's an interesting subversion, or that's not what I was expecting. You kind of said that it really just sort of plays out the way you think it will. And I had the same sort of feeling where Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, he's kind of playing into how New Orleans, this is our location, and they really capitalize on New Orleans as a place instead of it just being like a backdrop like it is in another Netflix movie like The Lovebirds. It actually plays into the story of like the people of this city feel like lab rats. They feel like their lives don't matter, and they actually mention Hurricane Katrina implicitly a few times, and playing into like the resentment they have toward the government. Mm-hmm. There's a movie right there, and this movie just barely touches on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's like, it's kind of like that same issue I had, and this is going to be a comparison, it might seem worse than it actually is, but like Fan 4 Stick, like there's that scene in the middle where like they kind of like explore like the humanity of it, and like the idea of like having superpowers is like a terrifying thing. And it's like, it's like a really, like, especially in this like superhero boom, like that's a really interesting idea for a body horror film. And like this movie kind of touches on that as well. Like you kind of like see like the idea of like, when they have superpowers, like it has like damaging effects, like Machine Gun Kelly, like his body's burned. Like he's not like he's like Johnny Storm or whatever. But like these are like interesting ideas. I just don't think the script is smart enough to really communicate them in a way that's as effective as the concept is, which is disappointing.
Yeah, I'm always a fan of when movies like this sort of de-gloss or de-glamorize the superhero genre. I think we're definitely overdue for that when it comes to a bigger budget, more mainstream offering, because we've gotten it plenty of other times in not lesser films, but smaller films, I should say.
And like TV and stuff like The Boys and things. Yeah.
The Boys, still working through season 2, which is coming out pretty soon. And I cannot recommend The Boys enough. I know, Will, you are sort of soured on it because you accidentally watched the season 1 finale instead of the pilot. I still don't know how that happened, but
I have my ways.
If you can get back through it, Will, it's really rewarding, and that is a much better alternative watch for any listeners who have not seen The Boys or are ready to watch season 2. That's going to be coming out soon, but it's such a fantastic exploration of the superhero genre through the lens of the people without powers, which is an idea that other things have tried. Like we've gotten like Powerless, and there was that one show where it was like kind of like Wayne Enterprises and employees, and like people have tried to explore this premise kind of before, and it tends to have mixed results at best. One thing that is coming out in a couple of weeks that could sort of lean into the sort of superhero body horror shtick, we should say, is New Mutants, which is supposed to be like a horror super kind of thing. Yeah. And I wonder how this is going to compare. They're sort of releasing around the same time. I think New Mutants is probably going to be an unforgettable experience for us. Yeah, one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, well, I say supposedly because who knows? Like, that's one of those movies that I'll see it when I believe it. Yeah, well, curse. Yeah, that too. Yeah. But yeah.
Yes. It reminds me of like Solo, a Star Wars story, where I fully expect, even when like I press play, or if I was at a theater, someone's just going to come out and say this movie never existed. So,
like you've been here for 100 years.
Yes, waiting for a movie that will never begin.
Yeah,
that's Project Power. Not much to talk about beyond all of that. I'm just a C on it. I think it's it's okay. It's a little less than okay in some cases, but there's enough in it that's good that I can't say it's a fully bad film to any extent. It is just totally serviceable. It exists. It's not very offensive to watch in the sense that you probably won't feel dumber having watched it, but it's a bare distraction at best.
Yeah. I mean, like if I was giving this out of like a 10, I'd say maybe it's like a 5.8 or 5.9. Like it's like almost there. I feel like
almost
it's almost
a C+.
Well, no, that'd be almost like a B-, because that to me is like about a C+.
Got it.
I think that's the thing. It's like a C+ verging on a B-. It's one of those things where it's like it's almost passable. It's like almost there for me. I just think it's like missing one or two things that could really make this unique enough or to stand out enough to where like I'll remember it in a week or two. As it stands, I think it just kind of ends up being somewhat serviceable. Kind of just does what it needs to do, I guess, but it doesn't really make an impression, which given the premise itself, which I think is, like you said, really interesting and really intriguing idea and with a lot of resonant themes, I think this movie just falls short in a lot of ways, which is a shame because like there's stuff here I like. I do like the two central performances. I do like the concept. I do think Henry Jost and Ariel Schulman are talented filmmakers who tend to do good things. But yeah, this one just didn't fully connect with me. I liked it a little bit more than you did. I got a little bit more out of this than I did The Old Guard, even though I'm kind of similar on this. But yeah, I think a high C+ is where I ultimately land on it.
I definitely prefer The Old Guard. I think that's a stronger film overall.
I think this is more visually interesting, at least to me, than Old Guard.
In some ways, sure. But I think that the story of it and some of the action set pieces, I think, are a bit stronger in Old Guard overall, minus the one scene we mentioned. I'll say that in both cases, Old Guard and Project Power, I have decent expectations for the follow-up. I think that they could be very good, could have a lot of potential, but we'll have to wait and see on both of those films. I know Old Guard is for sure getting a sequel. Yeah. We'll see about Project Power. It was a high budget kind of film. Depending on how many eyeballs it gets, I'm not sure if they'll be able to make another one, but they certainly could if they deem so.
Movies are pilots now.
Yes, that is kind of the case. All right, let's talk about our next film, Boys State. Now, I saw Boys State. You did not have time to check this one out.
Yeah, I don't have Apple TV, unfortunately, but I heard it's really good.
It is very good. So I already talked about this film a bit when it came out at Sundance. Saw this one at kind of the midpoint of the festival. I didn't write a formal review, but I did write down my thoughts, and I still maintain them. And so I took this chance to sort of like look back at the film, see how it holds up. And I took a look at what other critics are saying about this film. So I'm going to do just kind of a brief review and kind of a check-in, a little bit of a festival check-in here. Now, in case you didn't hear my thoughts on it before, this is from A24. It is now on Apple TV Plus, that streaming service. It is a documentary that was directed and produced by Jesse Moss and Amanda McBain. It follows a group of teenage boys, quite a few of them, like I think at least 1,000, who attend something called Boy State. So there's a boy state and there's a girl state that takes place in Texas. And they get all of these teenagers together and they have to create a fake version of a representative government from the ground up. They have to start with electing the very lower rungs of the government, and then to the point where they eventually elect like the higher office. And it really is sort of condensing the political process into arbitrarily, there are two parties the kids are sorted into randomly, and the kids have to meet with their parties and they have to figure out what are our issues, what are the things we believe in, and they have to vote on these things alongside the people they've already elected, and then that becomes their party platform. And then it gets into, all right, now we have to elect our highest office. I forget if it was governor or senator or something to that effect. It's like a very high office in Texas government, and it has to be built upon the party platform, and it's voted on by everyone across the two parties. And the point of this experiment, it's something that's been around for quite a while. It's helped shape a lot of politicians who are in power today, a lot of ones that you'll recognize, I believe like Bill Clinton, for example, Ted Cruz, people who are very, very prominent power-wise in the political world right now. And the point of this experiment is to show these teenagers, they're all around like 17 years old or so, show them really how does politics work. And you sort of go into it glossy-eyed of like, politics is about, fighting for what you believe in and creating change. And then slowly over the course of this documentary, though, you see a lot of kids figure out what politics really is. It's a horse race. It is really just you trying to make your team win and doing whatever you can to make it win. And we explore the viewpoints of several of these teenagers who all come at it a different way. You have one who is kind of just reptilian. He doesn't really have a core set of beliefs dictating what he does. He really just wants to win. Now, he does have certain beliefs that inform that drive to win, but he's the character who will he's a real person who will do really whatever it takes. And you see a lot of modern politics in this kid, and it's scary to see because of just how obvious and how potent it clearly is in our current world. You have another teenager who you can tell that he is just sort of saying whatever he needs to say to win, even though he is sort of more conflicted. And he's somebody who does have certain beliefs, but he has to hide them in order to do what he thinks will appeal to these kids. He takes certain positions only because he knows that they're more popular with this group of conservative children. I say children, they're teenagers. And then you have the more optimistic, the more idealistic, progressive guy, and he is like the central
character, I keep saying character, I don't know why. This film, this documentary is so narrative driven. It's sometimes hard to remember that it is reality. So in real time, I'm having trouble sifting that away. But that just speaks to how good this documentary is at pacing these events in a way that makes sense and is really electric to watch. But yes, the central teenager who is running this ticket that is very progressive, especially the odds are not in his favor to win, but he has these beliefs on things like guns and immigration and abortion, things that are socially progressive that most of these students have absolutely no interest in. They come from more conservative backgrounds, so they're opposed to it. And you're seeing him try to like appeal to the other side just by sheer force of his convictions. And what's more interesting about this documentary, because if that was all it would sort of fall into that danger zone of being like a puff piece about a kid. But instead, it's more of a microcosm of how all of these political forces collide and interact with each other. And I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned, no matter your political persuasion. There's a lot of hopefulness in this. There's a lot of reason for optimism, but there's also a lot of reason for just how desperate I think we are for the future of America in general to be controlled by people who do have real convictions, who do fight for the right thing, whatever they deem it so, and have good reasons for it. If this is the future, I think the future is mostly bright. I think we have to sort of accept that, first of all, these are kids, these are teenagers. They don't really know the world yet. So you're really watching immature, inexperienced people kind of punch above their weight. And I think that is the most interesting part of this movie, is when they do rise to the occasion, how fascinating it is to see. And I am curious what people who are I think people who are kind of in the middle politically, who are very independent and moderate, and they don't identify with any sort of political party, I think they might like this more than anybody, because it sort of appeals to a lot of centrist ideology in the sense that you can work with the other side, you can do this and that. And I think this will appeal to plenty of people who are progressive as well. I'm curious how it's going to appeal to people who do come from that conservative background, who might look at the way this movie treats or depicts some of those students and maybe makes them feel like they get less attention because they are conservative. I could see a lot of resentment thrown toward this movie of like, I feel like I'm not properly represented here. And then of course I can already hear the more progressive people saying, who cares, because they certainly feel like they're in the right. And that is sort of the tension of this movie. I have not talked to anybody who has taken a chance on this, who is a more conservative or at least center-right kind of political person. But when I do, I'm definitely going to try to listen to what they have to say about this movie as well, because I would be very fascinated to sort of get their reaction. I can only sort of, try to remember when I was a lot more conservative, how I would react if I had seen something like this. I probably would have said something about liberal agenda and it's super partisan and that sort of thing. But, there are more serious-minded conservatives than I was at that point in my life, who would probably have a more nuanced take on this. And I definitely want to hear it. So that's Boy State. I still highly recommend this. A-, must see, no matter who you are, where you come from. I hope a lot of people check it out. It is just brilliant to watch. And I really hope that people watch it and get activated to get into politics and to, get fired up about government in a way that is sort of rooted not by political power or ambition, but really just sort of like a desire to serve the public and to get your ideas out there, to fight for them, rather than complain about everything all the time online, which is unfortunately what I think too many of us are more resigned to do. So I hope you check out Boy State as well pretty soon. Will Ashton, maybe we can have a Boy State episode with the boys. I don't know.
Okay, sure.
All right, let's get into our next film. I started this film, Will.
Sure.
I was about 15, 20 minutes in, and I stopped. Sure. I did not finish this film.
You weren't bedazzled by that Apple, whatever, opening credit scene?
No, not even a little. So this film is called Magic Camp, and I tried, but I could not. I stopped around the time when we get to the Magic Camp, the Institute of Magic, and we start meeting the kids. Yeah. And I just sort of was like, oh no, this is a Disney Channel original movie, not made for my generation, that is kind of masquerading as a Disney Plus exclusive.
Well, not that. Like it was, I think it was going to go to theaters originally.
Sure. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. It certainly is trying to appeal to a wide audience. But this is the new sort of family comedy, I suppose, directed by Mark Waters. And
it is a comedy. I mean, it may not be a good one, but it is a comedy.
Well, it's a family. I don't know. I'm trying to make sure I'm saying family comedy in a way.
Yeah,
that
it's a family comedy.
It's more the family modifier. But yeah, so I just don't know how much, whole families will get into this unless they have, much younger kids. I think like the age group of the kids in this film, most of them are going to look at this and be like, no, thanks. Like, this is for babies. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the kind of reaction I think I would have had. I'm kidding though. I probably still would have watched it. That said, I think the main appeal of this movie is the two central lead actors, Adam DeVine and Gillian Jacobs. There is the unfortunate inclusion of Jeffrey Tambor, who is somebody who has, has some issues, some abuse allegations and things that we don't have to get into. But I agree with you, Will. When we were kind of discussing this last week, it is a bit jarring to see him pop up in here. I had a hard time with that, just because I think that's it's just strange seeing him in his capacity right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this movie, I don't know if you said, but yeah, it was filmed in 2017. And if you're wondering to yourself, hey, I've never heard of this movie, what is this movie? It's because Disney has done basically everything in its power to bury it, to the point where I believe the first trailer and the first poster for the movie came out a whopping 4 days before it hit the streaming service, which if that's not a sign that Disney just does not care, then watch the opening credit sequence, which was made on like Apple Movie or something, or
iMovie.
Whatever. iMovie.
Yeah.
And Corey Woodruff and I, friend of the show, were like, we could do this. Like, we could make, if we tried hard enough, we could make the intro to this movie, which just goes to show you that the movie really put like no real effort as far as the studio is concerned into marketing or trying to get this movie out to a wide audience.
It was supposed to come out in April 2018. And then it got delayed, and then eventually Christopher Robin took its slot. So yeah, it's been on the shelf for a while.
Yeah, and I was just more curious. I mean, the main reason I was curious is because I guess at one point, maybe I guess early on, if he pitched it, Steve Martin was involved with this film. I guess he came up with the idea, or like came up with like some sort of idea for it, pitched at Disney, but he is not credited, not even for like a story credit. So I'm guessing like his idea might have been a little bit weirder, or maybe a little bit more like idiosyncratic than what Disney had in mind for this. And they just kind of like went through the trials, because there's like 5 screenwriters involved with this film, and all of them, like I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but they're like writers from like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, How I Met Your Mother. I think Henry Winkler's son is in this. Wrote it. I mean, the guy who wrote Ingrid Goes West. So it's like a lot of talented.
They wrote different drafts of it after the original draft by Steve Martin.
Yeah, and I think you can kind of tell, because it's one of those movies where it just feels like you said, this is like the type of Disney film that would have been made maybe in like 2003. It's like kind of more modest in its approach, very character based, just kind of based on a concept, but just follows a very formulaic execution or standpoint or concept. And that's, I mean, I think it's a funny idea. Like, it's a cute idea for a movie, but Disney just goes through like the most fairly mediocre way of going about it, to the point where there's really not much to this that's, I think, really rewarding or investing. And I don't think Disney buried it because it's like exceptionally bad. I think they primarily buried it because Jeffrey Tambor was involved with it predominantly in a way that like they couldn't edit him out. Like they could maybe reshot it, but I don't think they care enough. So they are just like, yeah, let's bury it. But even if it did, if the allegations didn't come out, like I think this would have just been a Disney Plus exclusive, because I don't see a way that Disney could have made their money back on this. Like, it doesn't really have like a catchy premise, but it is a cute one. But the execution of it just kind of settles for, like you said, like a fairly Disney Plus or Disney Channel style. Like, it just has your typical like stubborn protagonist who learns to, accept the kids and then finds himself in the process. It's very much what you expect. But I do think if the movie did one critical thing, this might have worked. And that's, I think, if they switched the lead actors. Like, if Gillian Jacobs was like the kind of up and coming magician who like had a falling out, wasn't really sure where to go in life, and then she got roped into magic camp and then kind of found herself with the kids along the way. I think she's a lot more versatile and dynamic as an actress, that she could have sold this performance, while DeVine plays the kind of more like hotshot magician type who's like, kind of selling at
Yeah.
Vegas and stuff, and has like an ego.
That's
Like
more
I
his
think,
wheelhouse is like
Right, I
the
think-
confidence and the swagger that is kind of
Yeah.
goofy.
and I don't hate Adam Devine. Like I think he's fine. Like I don't think he's a bad person or anything. But more and more times I've seen him in movies, I also don't think he's a leading man. Like I just don't get the sense that he's like dynamic enough as a performer. I don't think he's versatile enough. Like I think he's kind of one note as a performer. And I think that's fine for like an ensemble like Workaholics, where he's like playing with a group. Or even like Mike and Dave Need Wedding Dates, which isn't a great movie, but he kind of works better off of like Zac Efron and stuff like that. When he's like in a movie like this, where he's like kind of like C grade Jack Black, like it just doesn't work. Like he just doesn't that interesting performer. Like he's not that funny. Like he's more amusing at best than anything. And I just don't think it works. So for me, it's a very much a like just C type film. Like for me, this is like a C streaming exclusive in that it's not terrible. Like it has charm to it. The kids are nice, and it's like it's not a movie you get mad about. It just doesn't really do anything special or unique. It just kind of follows the tropes. And you know, if you like that type of thing, it's not the worst thing out there. But you know, I have seen it maybe less than 2 days ago, and I've forgotten most of it by now. So I can't imagine I'm going to remember it in a week or two. So I think a pretty low C is where I stand on it overall.
You know, I think, you mentioned that it probably would have made its money back. It was a low budget, $24 million.
I mean, would it have made its money?
I mean, it would have made it, but it wouldn't have been a big moneymaker. It probably would have made a little bit over
that's
its
what I mean.
budget.
Yeah.
That's about it. And then, you can tell they didn't want to put the marketing costs in because that would have put them even deeper into the hole.
Mhm.
So I think Disney Plus is probably the best avenue or the best home for something like this. Even though I do think the premise is kind of funny. I think where this movie especially lost me is there's a scene in the very beginning where we're being introduced to one of the main characters, one of the kids in the camp, and the acting of it. I was just dumbfounded because like this kid and like his mom are like kind of talking around the idea that his dad is dead, and you're just sort of like, oh wow, they're just not going to say it, are they? Okay, that's fine. You don't need to. And then finally, like there's a line of dialogue that amounts to like, well, my dad is dead, and like it just sort of like comes out, and it's, I don't know, the acting of it is just so bizarre to me. And I think once we got to the camp, I was like, this isn't going to get any better, and I eventually just turned it off. So
yeah, I mean,
glad I gave myself an hour of my time back.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, like, there's a couple like concepts for the kids I think are kind of amusing. Like, I don't know if you got to the bunny girl yet, where you left off. But, like, her character is, I think, a really funny idea, and I think the actress does a great job with it. But like, they just don't have any idea what to do with her character, and it's a shame because like her character is like a better movie. Like, she would be great. Like, she'd be the scene stealer. I guess she kind of still is in this because there's not much to it, but it's just the same. It's a shame because you can tell with like all the talented people that are involved with this, like there's probably a really funny draft of this movie somewhere that like Disney was just like, this is too weird for us. We can't do this, which is a shame. Cause I think if someone did this idea, but a lot funnier and maybe a little bit more weirder and wilder with it, like I think
like
work,
American Pie presents Magic Camp.
Jeez.
Sorry.
Let's dance away from that one. Yeah,
National
no, not
Lampoons.
that. No.
Sorry.
No, I mean, like, I don't know, because like when I was watching this, I'm like, this is kind of like, in some ways, it's almost like a kind of down to earth version of Harry Potter, right? Like, it's kind of like what if like all these kids are like in the magic and stuff, and
now you see me, that kind of thing.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, well, like more than now you don't see me. But yeah, I mean. Yeah, it's something like that. Like, there's an idea here that's really funny and I think could have worked. I just don't think Disney was interested in making that film, and it shows.
All right, well, that is Magic Camp. Low C for Will. A did not finish from John. All right, let's get into our last film of the week. It is the new documentary, Happy, Happy, Joy, Joy. This is another Sundance documentary. I saw this one back in January. I remember it quite well at this point, but Will, you had a chance to check it out for yourself, so I'm going to turn it to you. Just as a reminder, I did enjoy this documentary. I don't think it's amazing, but as somebody who didn't really watch Ren and Stimpy much as a kid, I thought it was pretty fascinating, the story of how Ren and Stimpy got made, and especially some of the stuff about its central founder, some things that I didn't actually know, and then some of the unfortunate realities that get brought up as well. But Will, you saw this. What is this documentary about overall, and what did you think of this one?
Yeah, so Happy Happy Joy Joy is a documentary by Ron Shiro and Kimmo Easterwood. And on the surface, it looks to be a kind of more traditional, kind of like behind the curtains talking head documentary where we're talking about like the making of this very like iconic 90s TV show where, you know, it broke a lot of ground, like it did a lot of things for the medium in a way that kind of made it a little bit more like we see today with like SpongeBob and South Park and Beavis and Butthead and like every show that's on Adult Swim right now. Like they all draw back to Ren and Stimpy. And, you know, it was a big critical hit at the time, especially for Nickelodeon, who at the time, you know, like in the late 80s, early 90s was just kind of trying to find its form. Like, I guess for kids like us, you know, who grew up in that time, you know, Nickelodeon just kind of seemed like a thing that was always around. But as the documentary shows, it was a fairly new TV kind of startup at that point. So this definitely helped to establish its brand. Like I said, like it helped to kind of pioneer like the type of shows that they would play, at least from the animation standpoint later on. But like you said, like the show itself has all this baggage from primarily being the work of John K. John Krzyzewski. I don't know how to actually pronounce his real name.
Kricfalusi, I think is how you say it.
Yeah, I mean, he's traditionally known as John K. So I'll pronounce it as such. But yeah, I mean, the movie, it's primarily looking at, you know, like archive footage and then like watching the show and then hearing from all the people involved with it, like how this got made, how this got through, like all the sexual innuendos and stuff like that. And then midway through, or I guess actually pretty close to the end of production, there's a BuzzFeed article that came out which talked about allegations against John K. of sexual abuse and sexual misconduct. And the movie had to go back into production from what I can tell. And from that point, I guess John K. initially wasn't involved with the film until the allegations came out. And then he was willing to be interviewed. And then for about a little bit of the film, we hear more directly about his response to those allegations. And we hear from one of the victims, Robin Bird, I believe is her name.
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And we, you know, it paints the film in a much different and darker light. And I think as a documentary, it's for me very frustrating because I think I get what it's trying to do. Like, I think this film is in a tough spot where it's like it has to acknowledge this very dark thing where it's obvious like the show's legacy is obviously tainted by its involvement of John K. And it's not like he was just like the creator. Like, it's very much his influence, his style is apparent to the show. And it's kind of in this weird place now where, like, I guess Comedy Central recently announced they're going to reboot Ren and Stimpy. And there's this whole conversation going around where it's like, can you separate the art from the artist? And more importantly, like, is Ren and Stimpy solely devoted to John K., or is it a little bit more of its own thing? And the documentary itself, like, it's not intending to answer that question, but it's kind of in this place where it's supposed to, because the documentary is constantly talking about like, oh, there's all these people, like, you know, like all these animators, all these brilliant people were involved with the documentary. And, you know, I mean, the show isn't just John K. And like, here's proof when he did his own thing, like Ren and Stimpy clearly wouldn't be the same if it weren't for these people. But it constantly goes back to, it's like, oh, but John is the guy who did it. And like, he's the one that pushed for it and all this stuff. And it's in this very weird place where it's like, it's revering John as an artist, and it's like talking about how he changed the medium. And it's like also acknowledging all of his important behavior beyond the allegations. Just like as a boss, he was, you know, incredibly demeaning and ultimately fairly self-destructive as well. And then it's like acknowledging all these things and talking about his artistic stamp. And it's like, I think I get what it's trying to do, but I think the execution of it is ultimately a little bit messy. And I think the thesis doesn't quite end up as strong as it wants to be. Primarily, I think because it spends so much time hearing from John K. and getting his side to the point where it's in this very dangerous territory of almost having him dictate the story. Like, he's even the one, I think, that says the very last quote of the film. Like, he gets the last word in it. And it's this very difficult thing to discuss and explore in a way where it's like, I don't think it's a bad documentary. Like, I think it's well produced. Like, I think it's generally well put together. But I just don't think the thesis that they're trying to go for here ultimately lands, because the execution of it leaves something to be desired.
Yeah, I think it's weird because I don't know how different our grades are going to be, but I think that I certainly disagree with some of your criticisms and agree with others. I think that ultimately, it's like you said, the documentary makes a case for why this show wasn't fully the work of John K. And it sort of hints and builds up to the idea that he was certainly important to bringing this about, but it was mainly like certain people who saw potential in things that he sort of like threw out there and him being willing to fight battles to make things edgier. And it was sort of the balance of the art and the artist in that sense that led to what Ren and Stimpy was. And you're right that he wasn't able to replicate that later. That was the most like fascinating aspect of the documentary, is that you see this guy who is a total control freak, and he is very egotistical, and they sort of build up to it, and they point it out, and that he was hard to work with. And then you find out all of these allegations that come later that further taint the legacy of the show. I guess I didn't think it was very messy, because I think, I guess I shouldn't say it was messy, but I think it was messy in a way that makes sense, because real life is messy. And I don't think it was the fault of the filmmakers. I don't think that there was a way for them to do a straight line of how all of these things happened, because I think if they had, it probably would have been disingenuous and would have come off as insincere to me. I think they were kind of just telling this like straight line of a story, and they were clearly trying to like get a lot of different perspectives. And one thing I disagree with is I don't think we hear from John Kay that much, as you're implying. I think that we hear a little bit more from him toward the end. I wouldn't say that we shouldn't make it sound like he is like a very constant presence, like his voice throughout.
I'm sorry, I disagree with that. He's in it a lot. At
least like the current version of him. I think most of what we get from him is like filtered through other people.
I mean, he is, but he's in it like at least like 40% of the film.
I'm not saying he's not in it. I'm saying like the modern day version of him. It's not
that's
like
what I'm talking about.
Okay, so you think there is a lot more of him?
Yeah, there's a lot more of him in that. I think you're implying.
I mean, we must have seen totally different versions of this film. I definitely don't recall that. Of course, you've seen it more recently, so I have to defer to you.
I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, like how much he's in it, but he's in it quite a bit. Like he's not like a side part of it. Like he's definitely interviewed quite a lot throughout the film.
Well, I think what I recall is that by the time you get to the end of it, this was my read of the film, I think the documentarians actually took a lot of time and care to really point out that he is ultimately, by any like person's reasonable interpretation, just a bad person who, at the same time, in the 90s, he had that sort of like mystique. He had that sort of like, oh, this guy is some sort of like genius. And then I think this documentary is about the crumbling of that as soon as you sort of push him out of a realm of power. And so that was the thing that I thought was very fascinating to me. And I thought that it was something that was like, it doesn't matter how much of a creative force you think you are. I think that like you can still be your own worst enemy. And I think that this documentary is ultimately about how self-destructive he was, and about his pride in thinking that he was Ren and Stimpy at the expense of the other people who really were the ones who helped make this thing happen, from the producers and the animators, who kind of got sidelined because of his own ego. So that was the thing that I found more interesting, and I took away from it a lot more than any sort of like messiness or any sort of like, oh, is this revering him too much? I really didn't, just personally, I really didn't get that. I didn't get that from this documentary. I didn't really think that was something that was very present. What I got was, it was more present of just how much of a dirtbag this guy is. And I think to push on that any further probably would have just felt like a hit piece more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, I guess where we disagree is that I don't disagree with you in that I do think the filmmakers recognize that as a person, John Kay is an abhorrent guy. Like, he is very disturbed. Like, he has these very dark, he has very dark past, and you know, his personal life is filled with all these disgusting things that are indefensible. But I just think where the film is a little bit more messy is its legacy is him as an artist, and I think that's where the movie. I think the thesis is there. I just don't think the execution fully backs up that thesis. Like, I think that's what they want the movie to be, and I think that's where they say at the end of the film, or they're trying to say at the end of the film. But ultimately, I think it's this film that's caught in between what the movie was initially, which is that it was going to be a more traditional, like, look at Ren and Stimpy, like, you know, John was this kind of mysterious guy, and it's like, let's explore him as a person. And then we got the second movie that's kind of coming in now, where it's like, okay, John's actually talking to us. He's telling us directly what's going on. Now he's also addressing these allegations that have come out against him. And it feels like the movie for me is at the standstill, where it's trying to do these two things, this push and pull. And I find it frustrating because I I think that other film is what needs to come out more. And it's like, I don't exactly know how they can make that film because it's a lot trickier and it's a lot harder to make that film because you have to have the involvement of people, like Robin Bird and Kay Rice. I don't want them to come on the spot and, unless they feel comfortable doing so, talking about this. And it's one of those things where it's like, we see from like the head of Nickelodeon, it's just like, this didn't happen overnight. Like, this is something that's been going on. And the movie kind of leaves that note. And it's like, okay, like, if that's the case, why are you not diving into that more? Like, why is that not being discussed more in this movie? And for me, I guess that's where I find myself frustrated. It's that like these things are unavoidable to who John is as a person, especially as we're moving forward, especially as the show is moving forward. It's where is this, like, where is that documentary? It's like, I don't know if they can make that movie. I don't know if they, or have that liberty to do so. And I don't know if it's one they can make. And it's also like, I don't know if people will see that movie, but I just feel like this movie is kind of caught in between two places. And for me, it's frustrating to watch it because, like I said, I don't think it's a bad documentary, but I just don't think the execution ultimately is worthwhile. And as it is, like, I think it's almost there, but it just doesn't work for me.
We definitely disagree, but at the same time, I think I'm frustrated by different things. The thing that frustrates me more is that, because I do think that they handle the connection between why Kricfalusi, why John Kay was able to sort of like what's going on with him right now, his Me Too moment. To me, they sort of make the case for why that's an extension for his behavior during the course of the show, while also recognizing that the show really was a reflection of a lot of his ridiculous character flaws. And I think the most interesting part of the documentary is how they show, like, how did this cartoon happen? Something this just really messed up, to be frank. How did they convince people to put this in so many TVs around the country and expose kids to this sort of thing? And I think it does sort of tie into, like, Nickelodeon was such a young network, and there was sort of this like wild west of being able to like get away with a lot of this stuff. Though there were, of course, limits. And I think that the documentary kind of shows that, you can't explain what happened with this guy in a very specific way. But the thing that frustrates me more is how the documentary doesn't really get the chance to examine, how really this like negative work environment through how people looked the other way, I suppose, like how they didn't address what was going on in the moment. At the same time, I think that it's smart for them to really like allow Robin Bird a lot of time to explain what happened in her own words, and using the archive of like the letters that she wrote to John Kay, for example, and really proving that out and not leaving it ambiguous. I think that's where I think the documentary is pretty responsible with how it reports all this stuff out. But I guess I look at it and I see a pretty simple story of just a very disturbed person who got away with a lot because he was good at something. And then eventually he faces reckoning for it. And I suppose that one good thing that this documentary can do is that it can show people why the idea of like a Ren and Stimpy reboot is a terrible idea. And so in that sense, I think it is pretty successful, even though I kind of at the same sort of vein of criticism think that there's more to get at here. There's more stuff here that I think that they should have tried to dig into and maybe delayed releasing this once they kind of looked more at how did this happen under the nose of so many people who, supposedly could have done something about it. I think that there's an interesting documentary there as well. But yeah, I guess what you're getting at, the sort of like separation between the art and the artist and all of that, I think that's in here. I just don't think that it's certainly not borne out in a masterful way. I think we can agree with that, but I don't think it's to this documentary's detriment, honestly.
I mean, you said
detriment.
something that, I think you said something that ultimately is where I am, which is that I think the movie, it needs to be fleshed out more. Like I hate to say this because I feel like there's so many docuseries right now, but it's like this need to be a docuseries. Like this as a movie, I just don't think this really works because like there's so much here that's left unexplored or it's left like a little like wonky in its execution that I think they need to do like more interviews, like kind of explore this a little bit deeper if they could, like and talk about, like you said, like the work environment a little bit more and talk about these things in a way that I think addresses that more than like the last 10 or 15 minutes of the movie. And ultimately, I am just frustrated by that. I guess for me, like I do recognize a lot of what you're saying. Like I think those praises are valid, and I think that's fair for the film and the filmmakers to say. But ultimately, at this point, I just don't think it fully works. And it's not a bad documentary. Like I think if you're a fan of Ren and Stimpy, you can probably check it out because it's interesting to explore these things. And I admire the filmmakers for actually, you know, not ignoring them and actually, you know, like diving into a lot of these very upsetting and hard to swallow things. But yeah, I think as it stands, it's like almost there. Like, I think there's stuff in here that works. I think they are willing to challenge John Kay and acknowledge his faults, which is good. But as it stands, yeah, I think there's just a little bit too much reverence for him as an artist here, and not enough time spent really exploring his like very serious faults as a person. And it's there, but just I don't think it's enough to really even it out. So for me, it's like
that's our main disagreement.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's fine. You know, I mean, that's what's
I think it's a valid interpretation of like, it wasn't enough for you. It, you know, and it's hard to parse that out because it is so hard to watch something where it's like somebody you might admire. He's not somebody I personally admire. I was not a fan of the show, but I know some people really did look up to him, or some people really liked Ren and Stimpy. And I can imagine this is something hard to watch because you find out that he's really a monster. We should say, and we didn't really get into this, but it is based sort of on a book called Sick Little Monkeys. And you can sort of tell that John Kay is participating in this mainly because he probably needs money. Because, you know, previously he was like very against that book. And it was clear that he was not going to like, you know, he wasn't a fan of how his story was being told through that book. And now he's sort of like, you know, helping out with this documentary in a sense, I suppose. But I think it's because he's financially in a lot of trouble. You know, his Kickstarter thing didn't work out.
I didn't even know about that.
Yeah, that was a while back. And then as far as I understand, I don't believe like this revival he's going to get anything from. He's not going to get any like royalties. He's not involved with it. So if you do watch it, you won't be indirectly supporting him. I think he only has rights to like one character. And I think, if I recall, they do touch on this character. I forget the name of him, but there is a character that he was like obsessed with or something in the Ren and Stimpy show. And it's the only one.
Yeah, they talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The general guy, I think, or like something like, I think the character was based on his dad.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Some weird psychology in this. So yeah, low C+ for you. I'm definitely like a high B- on it. High C+, excuse me. I'm like a high B-. I had a feeling our grades weren't that far apart. It's like we have like one core disagreement.
Yeah.
That is very hard.
Isn't that always the case? Usually. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, to be honest, like I'm probably more of a B on it. If anything, I think that like just like the passage of time has sort of like sobered my B and slightly into a higher B-. Seen a few other documentaries since that were a little bit stronger, but certainly in that same zone, I think, for me. So I still think that it is worth watching, even if you have some of the frustrations that you're getting at. I think that they shouldn't be a reason to keep people from watching this, because especially people who don't know about this story, this is a good starting point. I suppose something we could both probably agree on is that this shouldn't be the end all be all for the John Kay controversy and all of its context. I think we'd definitely agree on that.
Yeah, I think there's a better documentary here, maybe even from these filmmakers. I just don't think this version of it is the best version. I think it's just somewhere in the middle. And I think ultimately the stuff that really nags at me is it just keeps nagging at me, even though, like you said, there is good stuff here. And I do think they are willing to kind of dig into the weeds and really explore John Kay in a lot of different ways as a flawed person. But yeah, ultimately it just didn't fully work for me, but I can see what you got out of it for sure.
All right. Next week on the show, we are going to be talking about another Disney Plus movie, a new exclusive, The One and Only Ivan, which is a new fantasy film directed by Theus Rock and screenplay by Mike White. It's based on a children's novel that I've never read. I don't know too much about this, but I know that Sam Rockwell is in it. Angelina Jolie, Danny DeVito, Helen Mirren, Brooklyn Prince, fantastic looking cast. I think one of the voice actors includes Bryan Cranston and Ariana Greenblatt, a few others. So Philippa Sue from Hamilton also. So she's on the Disney Plus in 2 places now. So that's going to be coming out. I think that'll probably be your featured review, you think?
I mean, unless there's something else that's coming out that's a little bit more high profile. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't think you're seeing Unhinged.
Well, yeah, I'm not planning to see Unhinged. This is the one that for some reason got a theatrical release instead of drive-ins, which I think is kind of strange. But
it is coming to drive-ins, but yeah, it's hitting
theaters. They pushed for it though to be also
right, which I don't get.
Thriller starring Russell Crowe. The old log line isn't very grabbing to me. It's about road rage. This came out in theaters in Germany. I don't think the reviews have been super good. So I don't really have a lot of interest in this.
No, I mean, that's the thing. Yeah, as I was telling us off the air, it's like, I really don't get like a movie like Tenet. I'm like, okay, fine. Like I get they want that for the theaters because it's like a theatrical movie. Unhinged, it's just kind of a trashy movie with Russell Crowe. And it's about a guy with road rage. That is the ideal movie for a summer that's filled with drive-in movies, or not filled with drive-in, movies that need to be filled, that drive-ins need to fill. It's one of those movies where it's I don't get why this didn't push for a big drive-in release or this. This seems perfect, but I'm not the people involved with this, so I don't know.
Sure. I don't know the current state of drive-in theaters around the country, but one thing I've noticed, at least in the Bay Area, is that a lot of them are not playing new movies. And a lot of them are just playing older movies because that's what people want to see. They don't want to see.
Well, that's what they could book, I think. I think that's what happened, is that they weren't sure what was going to come out, what wasn't. So it's just just book something that we know we can get. We know we can get Willy Wonka and Chocolate Factory because it's done and they will play it. It's we don't know if they'll play
people
Bill
will see
Ted.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of what it comes down to. I think a lot of drive-in exhibitors are just we don't want to play Relic. People, there's no marketing for it that's going to get people to want to watch this at the drive-in. They want to book Madagascar or, known quantities. And I think that is a big tension for these drive-in theaters. And it's a big reason why I haven't seen a lot, because there's not that much availability.
Well, yeah. And I also think they were kind of burnt by I think a lot of drive-ins were going to play King of Staten Island. Then Universal, last minute was oh yeah, no, we're not showing that at drive-ins. That's the only VOD. And I know a lot of drive-ins were really burnt by that. They're we were selling tickets for this. How could you do this? So I think that's another factor, is they just don't even want to deal with that. So it's a lot of things.
Makes sense. The next film that I definitely want to be checking out, this is Tesla, which is going to be hitting VOD, I believe. This is the new IFC Films picture. We've got a lot of IFCs last month, but this is a biopic about Nikola Tesla, who's sort of the hidden Thomas Edison, many would say, who discovered a lot of things that Edison gets credit for. Stars Ethan Hawke and Eve Hewson, Eben Mossbach-Rock. I think Marconi, Jim Gaffigan. I think Marconi is also somebody who gets more credit or doesn't get enough credit. And I think Tesla gets credit instead of him. There's a confusing thing between Tesla, Marconi, and Edison that I don't fully understand. Or at least, it's been a while since I looked into it.
Yeah. Well, there's that movie, The Current War, that came out a year or two ago, which was a movie that didn't ultimately work, I think, but it was a really interesting idea. And I was there's a really good movie in here, but I don't think this is fully it, but I hope someone makes it. So that's why I'm excited to check this one out. I don't know if the reviews are that good, but
yeah. I've heard good things. I've heard things. I haven't heard anything outright negative. This came out at Sundance as well. I didn't see it there, but I know some people who did and said it was okay. And nothing super enthusiastic. It's kind of in the middle, but I'm still interested enough because I really like Ethan Hawke. And I always like seeing Jim Gaffigan in more serious performances.
George
and Colin
Westinghouse
McLaughlin, too.
Mm-hmm. And I believe this is Ethan Hawke reuniting with the director that he made the Hamlet movie with.
The director is, and the screenwriter is Michael Almereyda. So... yeah, interesting matchup of talent here.
Hamlet says one of his soliloquies in a blockbuster or something. It's a very weird movie, I've been told.
And last, we have a film. I've already seen this one, Words on Bathroom Walls. This is hitting VOD. It's Roadside Attractions.
The Plumber Boy.
Yeah, so Charlie Plummer is the main character in this. We also have Taylor Russell from Waves and Escape Room. Andy Garcia has a bigger role in this than I was expecting. Also Anna Sophia Robb and a few others. And Walton Goggins, who really stands out in this, actually, to be totally honest. I already checked this out. This one's about a kid who deals with schizophrenia and he hears voices, and it's kind of taking The Fault in Our Stars sort of thing. It's taking teenager who has a certain, best way to describe this. He has something going on with him that is preventing him from living the teenage life he believes he wants. And it's about, sort of wrestling with his mental illness. And it sort of it dances around some tropes that I really hate, including all you need is love. And then it sort of comments on them. And I think in a way that is
breaking news. John hates the Beatles.
Right. No, I love the Beatles, of course.
Yeah.
But I think that this film has a lot more flash than I was expecting, and there's some decent substance. I think it's a little messy, but we'll talk more about it next week, I think. I'm still kind of collecting my thoughts on it. I saw it 2 weeks ago, and I might see it again, but it just to kind of recall certain scenes that I was a little iffy on. It's a hard movie to talk about, just because like some of its stuff, as somebody who hasn't gone through what the character in this goes through, I'm really anxious to see what people are going, like what other people are going to say, their perspective and their takeaway. And I have trouble like fully recommending it, because there might be some things that I just don't register to me as harmful for this community. That might be the case. I didn't get that sense, but again, I just want to be cautious about what I say about a film that really is tackling stuff that's hard, very difficult, and that doesn't get a lot of movies don't get into this, and I think it's a shame. I hope this movie is a fair representation of that community. We'll probably get into that more next week. That's it for our show this week. Thank you, as always, for listening. Don't forget, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever else you love your podcast. Hang out with us on our social pages, our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All that stuff is in the show notes. And we'll see you all next week from the Internet, California. I am John Negroni.
And from Internet, Pennsylvania, I'm Washington.
See you next time.